We are live. I'm Shervington Hannies, and this is the Recovery Show. Okay, I know you all, those of you who have been there with me from the beginning on Spotify, have been committed and faithful. But you also have been very patient as we make the transition to bring all of that onto LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live. I know, you feel a little neglected. But guess what? When we get together, it's always a good time. Thank you for continuing to be committed and consistent in your support of me and your encouragement by your downloads on Spotify. And I think I got a good little hint as to what you did with my 5 day complimentary offer on Amazon with the republishing of the book with a new title. What a difference a title make. I was very, very heartened by the downloads across the board. A totally different experience as against the first time I launched it with another name. Now looking back at the name, I'm like, what was going on with you, Sharpington? Come on. So yes, very heartened by the download. And that was the intent, to give as many of you, okay, a complimentary copy of How to Rescue Yourself from Low Self Esteem, Chronic Low Self Esteem, and Self-sabotaging Mindsets. In keeping in that vein for today's How to Rescue Yourself from a Relapse here in the Recovery Show, I am going to be exploring the angle of what becomes your worst enemy in recovery. That's right. What becomes your worst enemy in recovery? Well, there's always the threat of a relapse. That's right. Always a threat of a relapse. And let's say it does happen. How did it happen? What was the root cause behind why it happened? Because that is going to make it so much easier when you do rescue yourself from that relapse. You will know exactly where to go because you would have done, hint, hint, you would have done your relapse prevention planning and created a plan and know exactly what are the things for you to be on the alert for, the lookout for, and if you do relapse, where to go, because that's where the prize for you will be. And you can then say, hey, yes, this didn't work because I was not vigilant. Come on, responsibility taking and being accountable to self and to the person who you would have called. Remember, our brief intervention, my signature brief intervention, one step, call a live person. You're in the midst of a relapse, call a live person. So you call the live person, you got an opportunity to say, hey, that's it. Yeah, I return to old ways of thinking, and then you get the opportunity after you call the live person, they're available, and you're gonna get an opportunity to go through the motion of recounting how you probably got there. And then you remember 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, even 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago. Okay, believe it or not, the process can be slow in getting there, but it can get there eventually once the process is started with a return to old ways of thinking. What is the worst enemy you can have along the way when you're in recovery? And that recovery can be for full sobriety in terms of full abstinence. You're not touching the stuff. It has now become the number one thing that you don't want to even touch because it's like touching a fire for you. Or you've decided, you know what? I want to be able to use substances like any other person. I didn't say normal. I said any other person. Because what is normal? What becomes abnormal as against normal? Those people who are able on the weekend to, yes, plan and say, hey, I'm going to go out for the weekend and I'm going to have some alcohol, whether it's wine, more hard stuff, or a beer, they kind of plan it. They don't obsess about it. They don't stay thinking about it all the time, thinking what it's going to feel like, when it's going to happen. I can't wait until it happens. That's a totally different thing. If you're experiencing any of those things, you might have a mild, moderate, and believe me, if you're spending all your time obsessing, come on, we know your time obsessing about getting it or even going through the act of getting it, then you've lost control. You've lost control to be able to keep it in socially regarded perspective and its place in your life. All right? But back to what's the enemy? I know I'm kind of like pushing it back, pushing it farther away, so you'll stay engaged with me and we'll be clear about the elements of what recovery really is. So, yes, here goes. Drum roll. Believe it or not, your worst enemy in recovery, listen, wait for it, is you. Oops, that wasn't what you were expecting? Yes, you. Don't click that button. Work with me on this now. Yes, lovingly, as much as you've committed, done the work to be in recovery. And oh, it has been, for some of you, it's been a week. Some of you, it's been 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and you're doing fine. 5 years, 10 years, you're doing your AA, NA. You're doing the work to stay in sobriety. But believe it or not, you, especially for those people who we lovingly refer to as being a dry, you know what, kind of like getting to a place now where I'm going to stop using that term and making fun of the fact that there's some people who have done everything to abstain, to stay away from the substance, but they still have all the behaviors, all the old behaviors. The thing that would usually lead them to the behavior, the event of using a substance, returning to an old behavior, an addictive behavior, whether it's obsessive gambling, shopping, obsessive shopping. And yes, I did it on the other show last Friday, so today I'm not going to touch on that. You know, that other subject that I bring up from time to time. Yes. So, that's right. You are your worst enemy in recovery. Because ultimately, it is you who will make a choice, conscious or not, to embrace an old way of thinking that will then have associating feelings. Because what happens is that the reward pathway in the brain that is connected with certain patterns, pathways, and networks in the brain, once you return to an old way of thinking, the thoughts will trigger the memory areas of the patterns, pathways, and networks in the brain, and then related feelings based on the stimulation, the stimulus, as we would say, that comes from that. Yes, I'm just going through with you how we get triggers, and then how those triggers become cravings, and then we get the event. That is a return to old behavior of either using, abusing, misusing substance. But if you notice, it was a process. So, your question to yourself, as against going to click that button, should be, what is it about me With my thinking, because if it stems from there, got to be something about my thinking that leads me to be my worst enemy in recovery. Drum roll again. Let's go with the first one. I sum them all up into, that's right, you got it, you've been following. I sum it all up into stinking thinking. That's right. It is stinking thinking that we're going to have to work on when you're going to embrace a way forward from a relapse or a lapse after you would have called a life person, recount how you got there. It was this. That's right. I remember last week I got really upset. Yeah, somebody told me that I've got an attitude, and I didn't like being told I had an attitude. How dare you tell me I have an attitude? Well, let me talk to you about that thing about someone telling you that you've got an attitude. It's one thing for someone to tell you you've got an attitude. They can tell you anything. Is another thing for you to, that's right, believe that what they're saying may be true. So then now, after they told you you had an attitude, and if after 3 days, 4 days, an entire week, 2 weeks, you are still thinking about the fact that they told you you had an attitude, whoa, you have bought in to what they told you, and it has now become your truth. Yeah. And then the things that you're going to be telling yourself about yourself that has led you to then start behaving a certain way that then threatens the action because you're in the action phase of your stages of change to say, I don't believe in this. This isn't working anyways. I still feel the same way. But then how you got to the feelings? You weren't feeling that before you were told that you got an attitude. Okay, let's stop everything right now. Do you have an attitude? Put away what the person told you. And how would you define an attitude for you? Why it is still bugging you 2 weeks later? Ah, you used to be told as a child that you had an attitude. And when they told you that, what was the thing that went through your mind and how did you feel? Angry. Yeah. Like you wanted to do something to, hurt somebody? Hurt yourself? Wow. So that way of thinking is rooted in and becomes a core, you've got it, belief through which you view and experience life. It shows up sometimes and raises its ugly head in relationships. And you get into arguments and you want to know, well, how did I get into that? And why was I feeling? I mean, she just said, hey, you got an attitude. I mean, that statement could have been, you've got an attitude about you that I like. The statement is innocent. Your interpretation of it. But who dare you tell me I have an attitude? Did you probably try to clarify? When you say have an attitude, what do you really mean? So that you are both on the same page as to what they meant and what you heard, and then interpret. And interpret in such a way that it does not lead to number one enemy of your recovery, negative self-talk. And negative self-talk inside a person with an addiction mind runs a soundtrack of self-attack I'll never get it right is one of the most popular one. And oftentimes when there's relapse or a lapse, is that your self-efficacy, your knowledge and thinking about your ability and capability of staying in recovery, staying in sobriety, doing this, especially if it has been chronic and repeated, you will have issues around negative self talk. I don't deserve to be happy. It's another one that goes with that. Yes, negative self talk. I can't get it right, anyways. Why even try? If you really have been in chronic substance use, abuse, misuse, addictive behaviors, over time you develop low self esteem in a lot of ways because more than likely, if you've lost control, you would be at a place where your relationships would have been compromised. Yes or no? Of course. And sometimes when you're being told you've got an attitude, it's because you might have been neglecting some of your responsibility and it's being brought to your attention, but because as a couple or as co-workers or as employer employee, you didn't have some counseling. I'm pushing counseling here. Yes, you didn't have some counseling as to assertive communication as against aggressive, passive, passive aggressive. You didn't have some support or some exploration of what is passive aggressive, bad styles of communication, not good for relationships. No, 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 no. Did you have some support, training, guidance, coaching on assertive communication styles? And what is assertive communication styles? And you notice that I'm harping on this whole thing of you've got an attitude. Guess what? Guess who was once the president of that club? Yeah. So I think I have some amount of that I can talk about it. Am I over it? No. I am still working at it. But guess what? I had a good opportunity to assess it and arrive at a place where, hey, I can be assertive about how I negotiate and communicate my needs to another with total respect and regards for theirs and strike a balance as to how I'm going to make very clear my needs known without violating or walking on or being abusive of the other person's right to be able to do the same. That is assertive. That is assertive communication. Passive, you would have think, well, if I be passive and if I don't tell people my needs, I'm going to be liked. I'm going to people please. Passive people get walked over. Passive people get taken for granted. Passive people get used, abused, and then discarded. And then you got a problem with really bad low self-esteem. And the likelihood of being triggered would become your enemy. So that's number one. Quite a mouthful, actually. But because this is going to be on demand, recovery show on or in YouTube and can be accessed from changeclinic.org, you can go back and listen to that part and be able to work on that if that is an issue. And for those of you who grab a copy of the, one second please. Yes, I couldn't. I tried to work through it, but I couldn't. So I had to try to work through that. And I don't have any water close by. Anyways, I'm going to work through this and try to get to the end and then go grab some something to drink. I just have a tingling in my throat. I'm not going to freak out the way I would have at the early parts of the pandemic. Because, yes, I've been keeping far from everyone. I go out, yes. I mean, I did a couple of getting around since the pandemic was declared March of 2020. Yes. So I'm going to share another one of the enemies that you embrace and support and display and demonstrate that can be a threat to your recovery, that causes chronic relapsing, and that you may have to rescue yourself from. And if you do not address, will cause you to relapse again. You get it now. That's the reason and the importance for me addressing this. Self pity. Oh, yes. People in recovery, if the balance and the work was not done well with your treatment and your forgiveness process, you see the reason for the forgiveness formula that I provided in the book, the forgiveness formula. This is the importance of it. The forgiveness formula, and for those of you who don't have it because you didn't get the book, I can share it with you to be clear about the forgiveness formula, but don't let's miss it. Self-pity. Because there would have been a lot of damage and strain and strained relationships if you did arrive at a place of a substance use or abuse or misuse disorder, you would have strained relationships. You would have cases for either during the time of your behavior of loss of control. Sometimes you do some real idiotic, I was about to say another word, things like taking people television and selling it and picking up anything that you can get your hands on, and then people have to not trust you anymore. I'm not saying this from a place of shaming you, but it is a truth, it is a fact that you do some behaviors that warrant people then drawing a line as to their association with you, or else they can be accused of becoming a codependent person in the relationship with you. And before you know it, they're contributing to your habit in many ways and one. And codependency in toxic relationships, because there's a saying that once one member of a family has an addiction, the family is now dealing with addictions. And oftentimes, one or more persons can be codependent in their relationship with that person who has the addiction. So, how? Well, you might be contributing in placating the person so that you don't have disruption or dysfunction or some more drama. So you give them whatever they want, codependent. Or you always jump in between them and their choices so they don't experience the consequences. Yes, when you do not allow a person to experience the consequences of their choices, that's a codependent relationship. That's codependency there. The natural consequences of their action and choices. So oftentimes you have to work. Sorry, I should have put this closer to me so that it doesn't disrupt, but I think I'm going to have to grab this one, or else we're going to hear it ring all the time or probably call back. appointment tomorrow with my physician, and that's who's calling. Let me turn the volume down on this. All right, sorry about that. Um, that's right. So, self pity comes up after someone would have taken a stance and draw the line. So, as Helen Keller famously said, self pity is our worst enemy. And if we yield to it, we can never do anything wise in this world. In moderate doses, feeling sorry for yourself serves a useful purpose in recovery. Yes, it does. Many persons with an addictive behavior have suffered devastating trauma, both pre-addiction and as a result of their addiction. Grieving for one's losses can be an integral part of the healing process. That's right. One of the things that happens quite often with people who have addictive behaviors or substance use abuse disorder is that there would have been a lot of loss of friends, loss of resources, loss of a sense of identity and purpose and place in a family structure, probably in an organization. Those are all losses. And that's the reason for the importance of forgiveness. And let's touch on this forgiveness thing just for a little bit. I'm going to quickly try to get the formula here. But as I try to get that, there we go. So I try to get that. My definition of forgiveness, and funny enough, it was that show, that podcast that I thought was going to blow up. Oops. That I was giving all this emphasis on making sure I have a formula and all of that. And the recovery show, the one that actually did blow up and now have its following and all that good stuff, was the one that was just being done as a hobby, as a passing thing. But that has now become the show. Wow. That's why your best laid plan, be careful with it. So, my forgiveness signature, yes, my signature, forgiveness formula for forgiveness and forgiving, a practical and rational guide to undertaking forgiveness and forgiving. First, the willingness to look at the same thing, event, or situation differently. First step, brief. If you cannot undertake, your forgiveness process will never take off, and you will continue to be in a mode of unforgiveness. After that, when acceptance, forgiveness, and change are the only wise and rational choices available to be considered, the need to look at the same situation, whatever that situation is, even if it's the most painful thing, arriving at a place of accepting that it happened. Anything else is called denial, a defense mechanism that is very primitive in the sense that not wanting to deal with something that happened, regardless of how traumatic it was, will lead to PSTD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I know post-traumatic stress disorder is said to do with large events happening collectively to us other people. Guess what? You can have post-traumatic stress disorder for an event that happened to you that overwhelmed you, just as if it was a collective large tsunami or something that happened to a group of people in a village. No different. So, your unwillingness to address that, to be in denial, and that's right. Denial is not truly lying to oneself. Denial is an unwillingness to embrace the truth. And that's what eventually leads to more trauma, because you're denying the truth. Not lying to yourself. That's a totally different thing. An unwillingness to even say that it exists. The truth about denial is that you know the truth. You just have an unwillingness to embrace it because you're afraid you wouldn't be able to deal with it. And that's what's traumatic. And that's what overwhelms. So denial is not lying to yourself. It's knowing the truth and being unwilling to sit in it, sit with it. Denial, a primitive and a number one factor that shows up a lot of time in the pre-contemplative stage of change before you embark on the necessary steps to change your behavior. Denial can be a big problem. Denial that, yes, I've got a problem. You're not lying about the fact that you've got a problem. It may appear so, or the common thing is to say that that's what it is. No. To accept that I have a problem is to accept a lot of things that comes with that problem. And that's the difference. Number two on the formula, which can be achieved with mindful meditation. And meditation, come on, stop. Don't run now. Meditation? No, you don't have to sit in a certain position. You can meditate. I meditate washing dishes. I'm not kidding you. I meditate the best washing dishes. Because you get fully present, so you're not going to break the dishes. Come on. And that's what meditation is all about. Getting fully present in the moment and giving total attention and focus to what you're doing mindfully. And it's during those times that I'm most creative and innovative because some ideas come rushing in when there is a void. Because the universe does not like a vacuum. And when the mind becomes so still because you're so focused, ideas flow if you're listening and if you're mindful. Good stuff there. Try it. Get something that you truly can immerse yourself in cognitively. That's right. And that's the reason for the book being a 7-day workbook. It gives you an opportunity to choose 5, 10, 15 minutes a day for 7 days and mindfully explore whatever it is that you want to change to arrive at a place where you see it differently, where you look at it differently, where you embrace it differently. Because it is with that that you can address your next enemy in recovery. Uh-huh. Guilt and shame. Guilt and shame. Now, what's this thing called guilt and shame? Oh, you know, I taught us so much. Of course, you know what's guilt and shame. Let me tell you something about guilt and shame in recovery. It ain't the same thing, and it's not what you commonly refer to. Let's be totally clear about guilt and shame in recovery. Guilt is that once you start the process of forgiving yourself, of accepting fully that the things that happen as they happen, not with any kind of putting little dressings on them so that it can be more palatable for you to navigate trying to get back into other people's good books and the whole works. No. Try working on you being at peace with the fact that accepting that a person who isn't now talking with you or you went through loss of a relationship, especially if it ended in a divorce, perhaps, that you're going to arrive at a place and taking full responsibility for the choices you made that had consequences that led to the divorce. Yeah, let that sink in. When you can arrive there and not see all the reasons for pointing your finger and blaming the other person, But finding ways to take responsibility for the things that you did or didn't do that contributed. I didn't say that make you 100% responsible, but made you responsible for probably starting the process that eventually led to the divorce. Can you see and find a way without becoming a victim? But take responsibility for saying, okay, this did happen. We're not yet at why it happened, who caused it to happen, what are the things that happened. We're not there. Because you know what? In the bigger scheme of things, that's right. Those things are not that important. What is significant because it can address the other thing that you will have if you truly lost control and arrive at a place of having a substance use, misuse, or abuse problem. And as according to the DSM, Diagnostical Statistical Statistical Manual, DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, always trip me up. I thought I was going to get through it. Anyways, I'm working on it. By the time I get through all the episodes of the full life of the recovery show, I'm going to nail it. Working towards it. Yes, so the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, a diagnosis in there of a substance use disorder, you're not likely to see addictions because there is no such thing embraced by this manual or the ICD, International Classification of Diseases, by the World Health Organization, which is the equivalent of the DSM 5. That's the version that we're at right now. And every 8 to 10 years, all the group of psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals around the world come together and research and look at different ways of assessing and addressing mental health issues, of which addiction is a mental health issue. It's not addictions and mental health. Addiction is a mental health issue. And that's the reason why, yes, I'm an addiction counselor, because that's the policies and frameworks and the whole logistics that were already in place for licensing and all of that around the world. So they keep the title. But that's the reason why I'm referred to an addiction, a certified addiction counselor, and mental health professional in this case. And because most of my work is done online, I have the designation of a telehealth professional, in that I have the additional know how and training to do stuff remotely and still follow the ethics and all the guidelines to support others as they make behavioral change. Right. So it's been just around 38 minutes since we've been doing this. I'm going to start wrapping this up. We have gotten to a kind of a comfort space or a perfect spot of 45 to 46 minutes that we get this in. So I'm kind of like going to try to stick to that and work towards that, because that's been the there's a word I'm trying to get, but it's not coming. That's been the whatever spot that I've been hitting. Okay. Because like last Friday when I thought I was in over an hour, 15 minutes, when the recording was done, it was bang on, just around 45, 46 minutes. So, yes, so there is self pity. The problem arises when self pity zaps you out of your motivation to recover or turns into resentment, hopelessness, or blame. Instead of taking responsibility, self pity becomes a way to justify blaming others or refusing to take positive action. While self pity may have served a purpose in active addiction, close to denial, left untamed, it can jeopardize your recovery. Yes. So let's try to get all of these in. Just like the How to Rescue Yourself from a Relapse show, there is a website for our recovery show. Still being worked on, mind you. But I'm going to make available these handouts, okay? So it's an easier way for you to have access. After each show, 24 to 48 hours, the handout will be available on the recovery show dot ca, I think. Yes, website, and you'll be able to grab a copy of it. You'll be able to also see the recording of this. So if you miss the actual live taping of the show, you can always go back and see the on demand. Just so you know, most of what I've been doing, the multimedia things, all of them, the podcasts, the live shows, will eventually become a part of my online clinic. Or, that's right, Change Clinic is emerging into a virtual multimedia platform for edutherapy, educational therapy, but multimedia, music, podcasts, access to on-demand webinars, everything for you to have a holistic virtual experience of being at a spa. No, we're not going to do rehab. We're going to do a spa experience virtually. So that's right. Another one of my signatures, the one that I've been working on for 23 years. It's here. That's right. And I'm so grateful for all the support and guidance and being the wind beneath my wings to get here. And that's my gift to you. That's what self-motivation and healing ourselves online, SMARHO, coined in Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica, 24 thereabout years ago, was meant to be. And look at that. It took the pandemic and the rest of the world to help me get along there, because now we have better help. I'm not afraid to say yes, my direct competition, Talkspace. So now everybody are willing to consider SMARHO Change Clinic. But once again, like I would always do, I don't do red oceans. I don't get into the competitions. I do blue oceans. I make my competition irrelevant. And this is for those of you who I discussed this with last year. I wasn't ready. I'm ready now. And I'm going to take it by storm. Without any rain or wind. With very little resistance. Like I've done for 23 years. So that's right. So I said all of that to say, very soon, most of the stuff that is all over kind of social media will all be housed on the one roof in the clinic. Many of you will have total access, unlimited access to it. I'll find ways to make sure that you do. But yes, it's going to be a top of the line spa experience, virtual spa experience for self-care, especially for people of color, visible minority, so that we see that counseling, the stigma attached to it, should not be there. And we're just on 44 minutes, so yes, I'm going to wrap it up now. The other thing that you have to be mindful of that is a possible enemy in recovery: ego. Oops, ego. I'm not like these people. Oh, they have a problem. I don't. Well, yes, I used to drink a little too much, or I did that a little excessive, but I'm not like them. I'm kind of special, and I got this. But you keep relapsing. These egocentric thoughts typically mask deep rooted insecurities, anxieties, and fear. That's right. When ego is an issue, it's because it's masking something deeper. Core beliefs, the sub the superego, according to what Sigmund Freud would say. Two more quickly. Enemies in recovery: stress and boredom, especially boredom. Watch boredom. It leads to a return to old ways of thinking because you reminisce on what it used to be like. So if you don't have something specific to do, thought shifting, which we will deal some more with in our next episode next Monday. Thought shifting, I'll explore it. It has been explored already on how to rescue yourself from a relapse, but I will do it for the recovery show. Yes, I know. It does make my work a little harder to make sure that I make the two shows distinct in some ways, but hearing something more than once, even if you hear the same thing the same way, sometimes can have a very good, because in fact, that's how you arrive at a place of having, quote unquote, a substance use disorder. All right, signaling that the battery is going. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you, namaste, and bye for now. I'm Shervington Hannes. You can get more information at changeclinic.org. This was The Recovery Show. Bye for now.